In case you were wondering.
Yeah, I'm afraid my sound might be getting a little bit worse here as I'm packing things up, but
This is the last one before I get it figured out. So don't worry. Next one's fine.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Prize Fighters, Circus Freaks, and Gangsters. I'm Greta.
And I'm Jamie.
And this week we are back to talk about the epically beautiful show Shogun and how, darn it, it totally is an important thing to talk about if we want to talk about the 19th century.
If we were simply talking, if we were just doing a fashion show about textiles, we could probably do 8 hours on every single episode. Wouldn't you say? I mean,
every single episode.
I don't know that much about fashion and that sort of thing, but my God, just looking at the different ways that the different weaves in two different men's shirt on screen at a time, I'm just like, what would this even cost now? Like, his shirt might as well be made of gold.
The cords in their hair, for God's sake. Yeah. Oh, I mean, half the credits at the end of the show are the costume department to one extent or another.
That's awesome because those people deserve all of the credit that they can be. I mean, it is unreal. The set design, everything.
I mean, we are going to have to spend some time in this episode talking about hair, for God's sake. But, I mean, what better way to start a show than death?
Oh, before we begin with the death, I would like to point out that I was mistaken in the last episode. For I misunderstood that man being boiled alive as a Christian being killed for being a Christian. And what was actually happening was a robber/pirate was being boiled in oil. They were slowly boiled in oil, and this was a very common thing that happened in the Edo period. Edo, by the way, is what they called Tokyo back in the day, so that's also very important. And so robbers and ninja were slowly boiled in oil, and they had a very, very famous ninja outlaw in this time period in the 17th century. His name was Ishikawa Gomon, and he was like, so these ninja were the foremost masters of disguise, and he still got caught and boiled in oil right before the events of Shogun.
So, and I think, it's important that we sort of like emphasize that a lot of what's going on in the events of Shogun has to do with, what happened right before and why everybody's so, like, things may not be great now, but they could be so much worse and, like, within the living memory of these people. And so we're watching the Taiko, who he's like the headest of head warlords, die, and because it's a hereditary position and his son is so young, chaos, like he gets to slip away peacefully, but everybody else around him is like, oh my God, no,
Well, let's do a little bit of compare and contrast, because at the same time that this is going on, we have the Ottoman Empire being one of the most powerful empires on Earth on the other side of the world. And are you aware of how the kingship was passed down and all that?
I mean, it sort of depends, but I know it was never peacefully. Like the king or the
Sultan.
What?
Yeah, I couldn't come up with it either.
The Sultan, thank you. I was like, the Pasha, no. So yes, so the Sultan always had plans, but when he actually died, it was a bloodbath.
Well, so the reason it was a bloodbath is because a harem existed to give the Sultan male heirs. So all these women he's banging are producing dozens of kids. And so the oldest male would get the throne, and everybody else, and then he would have everybody else killed, so they wouldn't be a threat to his throne. All of the males.
Yeah.
And then the harem expanded into a jail when, like, the people forbade this because it's psychotic, and so they would just jail these infants for the rest of their lives. The whole thing was crazy, but when you put it up against the Japanese system, it's like I don't know which one. They're both terrible.
Well, I was just saying, hereditary monarchies always run into this problem. Oh yeah, and the whole Ottoman, like the harem thing, started off as like not a terrible idea. It was sort of like, I'm the king, and so I'm going to marry an important daughter from each one of my realms. Like that's how the whole harem thing started, and a whole bunch of rulers through time and history have done it. It's just, as in so many other situations, when somebody gets too much money, an okay idea gets taken to its like most crazy extreme and becomes hell for the people involved.
Yeah. It happens so much.
But yeah, anyway, but like every hereditary power passing anywhere in the world, I mean, the TV show Succession has the same problem. You've got the guy who like wasn't willing to hand over his power in a reasonable amount of time to somebody who could like take it on and no, we got to drag it out and make it hell.
Wait, is this a show about Donald Trump? What was it?
Oh, Succession. It's like pretend show about Rupert.
That was a joke.
Murdoch. Okay, never. Yeah,
I've never seen Succession, but is that the one with Kevin Spacey?
No. Succession is the fake Rupert Murdoch documentary.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have not seen that one.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, like this is not unique. It's the same thing that always happening again, but in way nicer rooms than most of the rest of the world had.
You know what? I think at this time we had a pope and an anti-pope in Europe as well, right? There was the anti-pope in France and the pope in Italy.
Yeah, it was, well, it's one of those times, but
so it was happening all over the place. They couldn't even agree on a pope on the success. Well, also it was like the Borgias and all these crime family lords that were in charge of the pope.
No, warlords are warlords are warlords. They're gonna happen everywhere. It's just we're in Japan doing warlords, so
yeah, they wear different hats.
Yes, but you can just sort of see like he's checking out. And he's like, this is peaceful, and everybody around him's like, oh God, my life is gonna suck. And then we go into their cool new intro sequence, which I was like, that is clever and cool.
Oh, it's the rock garden that's done as the world. It was really well done. It's kind of like a risk board rock garden thing. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and then having like the Osaka Castle like centerpiece as the centerpiece, and I was just like, yeah, that's it for people who are Game of Thrones fans. Like, this is where you want to be. And even if you're not a Game of Thrones fan, this is a good place to be because it's only 10 episodes, so it's a much tighter package.
Oh, yeah. This is like for fans of Sopranos, Game of Thrones. What else could you say? I'm definitely fans of Warrior.
Yes. I mean, it is. And then anybody who has any interest in historical fashion, just drink it in. Drink it all in.
Or if you just want to jump in a time machine to the 1600s Japan, it is crazy. Like, you feel like you're there. You feel like you could reach out and touch the dirty, wet straw. It is so cool.
Yes. And I also love, so we spend a lot of time in Japanese spaces with Japanese food and Japanese dress, and boom, you are in a Portuguese house. The Portuguese trade mission, because they're the only Westerners who are allowed in the country sort of legally. And they have a port in Nagasaki, which is how like the trading happens. Sort of like in China, there are a few walled cities, basically Canton, which is Guangzhou now. That's like, this is where Westerners can come and trade.
And they can't see it, but I'm doing a Japanese bow to the people in charge of the lighting on this show because, my God, the difference in the lighting between the Japanese and the Portuguese is even more stark and apparent than it is in Warrior. And it really drives home, like, how dank and filthy the Portuguese are living and how bright and airy and clean the Japanese society is.
Oh yeah, and the Japanese or the Portuguese house, like instead of having, like, they can't even be bothered to put the rice paper in the windows. They have like those big heavy shutters and they just have them sort of like gapped open, and they've got candles. Like, it's daytime outside, but they've got like candles in there, and it's dark and it's dank and the room's cluttered, and And
they're wearing really heavy, dirty clothing, and the Japanese are all bathing every day and cleaning their clothes every day.
And wearing like these beautiful patterned robes. And again, but the contrast, so there's the contrast of the Portuguese house and the Japanese houses, but how they eat. I feel like this is as good a time as any to just sort of like stop and pull out that contrast. In the Japanese houses, there isn't a dining room per se at this period. You have got hot and cold running servants. And so, of course, when it's time to eat, they bring everybody in their own little personal lacquered wood tray with, 6 different bowls, and they're all covered, and they're all like a beautiful little individual dish. Okay, these are the rich people, but even so. And whereas the Portuguese are eating on metal plates with metal forks, drinking out of metal cups, and all their food's kind of mixed together, and they're like tearing bread off with their hands and stabbing, it's just the tidiness and the talking with their mouths full. Oh, it's just, they're animals.
It really validates the fact that the Japanese were calling the white people barbarians at this time, because they really, we were savages compared to the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans at this time.
Yeah. And so all of the food that we have seen the Japanese eating so far is like rice and fish and vegetables. And, there's a porridge, and they talk about gobo, which is a root.
Have you had gobo?
Yeah.
Is it like taro or?
It's sort of like a savory carrot.
Oh, okay, interesting.
It's burdock root. I would call it a savory carrot, for lack of a better description. Oh, and the other thing they were eating was daikon, which is a giant radish that was pickled and colored. And anyway, so it's mainly vegetables and fish and grains. And the Portuguese are like eating all of this brown food. There's bread and there's meat and there's probably olives, I don't know. But the fact that the Jesuits were using forks in 1600 meant these dudes thought they were the hot shit, because the rest of the world was just spoons and knives.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Jesuits really did think they were hot shit, right?
Yeah, but forks were freaking fancy, and the fact that they were 2-pronged forks is completely like of the period.
Ah, all right, nice. I always loved those like serving fork style forks as a kid. Like we had one very expensive old timey set of silverware from my grandparents or great grandparents or whatever, and they had those, and I always wanted to use them, and my parents were always like, no, because they knew I'd poke my eye out with them.
Cork on your fork.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it was so, having seen sort of the Japanese eat, and we'll see them eat some more. And just like with the Portuguese here, and the way they're just talking business, and you can just see sort of like very stark cultural and food differences, and it's so cool. But boom, we get down to business. Kablamo!
It is also a hilarious conceit for these like filthy, backwards people to think that they're superior to these people. They're living in an obvious paradise. Even the one Portuguese pilot is like, this is paradise. Slow your roll. You don't want to go anywhere. And yet they're still living like savages. It's wild.
Hey, change is scary, and the way I do it is better because it's the way I do it, not because of any sort of, objective criteria. It's better because it's the way I do it. I mean, that's everybody, right?
Yeah, I guess I just described how Texas was formed too. So we're filthy, but we're American and we're here.
Yeah, I mean, people are just good at people. I don't know what else to say. And it's more like, you can't tell me what to do. You can't make me change. I mean, we just do that. But the important business here is the rudders, the record books from the Erasmus, from John Blackthorne's ship, and the fact that they say, hey, John Blackthorne, totally a pirate, which the Portuguese completely want the Japanese to know, but it also says, yeah, we are planning on taking over your island, which the Portuguese don't want the Japanese to know.
However, the Portuguese are really in some shit at this time, and they don't go into it in the show. But just before the events of this show, there were priests or seven Portuguese and Spanish priests crucified in Japan because there was a Spanish prisoner who was captured, and he told in Macau, and he told some Japanese, I think Japanese pirates or something, that the Portuguese and the Spanish realized there was no way they could take China and Japan by force. So they were flooding the country with missionaries. And so the Japanese had started cracking down on them and just started crucifying them and making laws against them, specifically because they knew they were being overwhelmed by proselytization.
Yeah, I mean, and there's always more to it. There is like the internal politics of Japan as well. But yes, the Portuguese had pushed too fast, too far, and thought they were being all sneaky. But yeah, the people in charge in Japan are like, whoa, whoa, slow your roll. And we're not going to even ask nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Well, especially, like you said, in authoritarian society like that, they are not going to allow something like Christianity to undermine the primacy of their social order. And without their social order, the whole thing falls apart. They need that deference to the person above you.
Yes, yes. And the permanence of your family's position, which, has been a thing in different places on and off. And it was the way the world worked in Europe for a couple hundred years after the Roman Empire crumbled and before the plague sort of just crushed the feudal order. But so it's the same thing in Japan right now. After all of this chaos, the Taiko said, hey, no more. You are where you are. You stay what you are, and no moving up and down the ladder anymore because we can't have this chaos. Cut it out.
No, things are pretty okay for us rich people. So everybody else, stay right where you are.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the move for every rich person ever. All right, things are pretty good for me, so everybody just keep doing what you're doing. Don't do anything more, don't do anything less. Well, actually, do more, but don't aspire to more. Just give me more of what you do.
Yes, do exactly what you're doing, but slightly faster.
Yeah.
And we get to see how good things are for the rich people because we're back in the Osaka Palace, and you sort of get to see that the heir to the Taiko, he lives in this magical protected world. He just sort of gets to run around kind of however he wants. He's the prince, peek at things. He has this whole trail of retainers. He just has no idea what the world is like.
Yeah, they had the same thing going on in China with the Forbidden City, where the emperor had his own city inside of the world, and so he thought he lived in the world, but he just lived in a world of magical servants. It would be like being the king of being the king of America and living at Disneyland.
Yeah, and I mean the kid is 7 years old, so it's not to totally bag on the kid or how they're doing it, because you do want a healthy, happy kiddo, but still, this could bode very ill for his growing up, having any idea of how the world works.
Marie Antoinette springs to mind. She was destined to fail because she was never given any opportunity to do anything other than what she did.
True. I mean, she had a better chance than her husband, and by being married to him, she was double damned. But she actually wasn't that rich as a kid, so she sort of had some understanding that, things could be bad. But yeah, once she ended up married to her husband and being in the French court, yeah.
It was over.
Yep. And so we sort of get to see how John Blackthorne is going to be woven into this pre-existing conflict.
Yeah, which is, it's got so many different sides to it because there's various different warlords who are trying to vie for power within this struggle between Confucianism or Zen Buddhism and Christianity. They're battling that way, and then they're all battling for primacy among, it's just crazy how many different sides there are.
And I think that it's good that, we talk about the sides, because the showrunners or somebody made a very, very important decision to color code our main guys.
And I still have not noticed that.
Okay, because we get to see John finally gets a translator, the Tsuji-san, the father Martin Albedo, and he's trying to tell John, dude, these are subtle people. cool it. And, John can't help himself. I'm just a straightforward guy. And fortunately, sort of he gets saved from doing anything extremely dumb because one of Toronaga's main rivals, General Ishido, shows up and he's just like, shut up, bow down, just you're a pawn, shit.
And so many, I think, maybe it's a Western thing, but so many guys have this, and I'm very guilty of it. Now I'm like a pit bull who's trying to pretend he's a cat. But growing up having that Doug energy where you're just like, oh, there's a new thing.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're excited or you're mad. You're still like, so it's tough to turn that off and to realize you can't move in every place like that. If you try to, people will just ignore you or worse.
And in this case, toss you in prison because you're too annoying. And so we're starting to meet the characters. We know about Mariko because she's, the translator. We know about Toronaga. He's brown. And he's kind of the head guy that we're going to be following around. And then he has his older wife, Lady Kiri. And she obviously has some clout. The fact that you have men and women together discussing politics, that would have been unusual in Europe at this time.
Well, also, imagine Blackthorn, who's he's fought the Spanish Armada and this and that. He's covered in scars at one point, so you can tell, he's been through some shit. He's almost certainly been in a prison of the Spanish or the Portuguese. He must have laughed his whole way through Japanese prison, oh, you're going to wake me up and make me take another bath and give me some more food? Well, this is terrible, sir, but I will accede to your demands. I think I can find it in my heart.
Yeah, nice wooden bars you got here. I mean, the only problem is, of course, he discovers that unlike European prisons where they put people down there and forget about them, part of the reason the Japanese prisons are so nice is nobody stays there for very long. This is just a way station before they get killed.
Yeah. You're going to die soon, but we're going to make it nice before you do.
Yeah, no reason to suffer, I mean, this thing has daylight and airflow and privies that obviously get emptied. You're still in jail, but God, it could be so much worse. I mean, there are sleeping chambers in European castles that are worse than this.
Yeah. I mean, these are about the most pleasant accommodations a person could hope to have in Europe at the time.
Yeah. And they're like, yeah, wow, jail sucks, man.
This would be like if you or I got arrested in Switzerland and they were like, you're going to have to go to prison. Alrighty, sir. Send me. I would like life, please. Thank you.
Do you know how much hotel rooms cost in Switzerland?
I get to eat Swiss food and get Swiss healthcare for the rest of my life? Yes, jail sounds awesome. Thank you. I would like some, please.
Yes. So now that, we've tucked John Blackthorn away in jail for a few moments, then...
Can you imagine? They just come around and they're like, all right, it's time for watchmaking class. Yeah. Oh, did you eat your chocolate today?
Yeah, we're going to send you to the doctor. We're a little worried about your weight loss. You're not looking so good. But then we find out that there's this council, this Regency Council that's supposed to look after the kiddo while he's, coming of age before he grows up and becomes Taiko. So this is where we sort of get to meet the other characters. So there's Ishido. He's the castle caretaker. He's sort of the youngest gruff one, and he's always in less fancy clothes because he's not as important a guy, but he's always in shades of blue.
Well, so I think I don't remember which episode we discussed it in, but we have discussed in the past that this happened in very many societies, especially European societies, where your class was color-coded.
Yes. And in this case, no, I just think the showrunners have they're going to color code these guys so we can kind of keep track of them.
But it is fun to think. Now, I never realized it before, but you get all those, it goes back to Brave New World, but all these, and Red Rising, books of that nature, where all of the casts are color coded, and I never realized that was an actual thing for the longest time. I think it had more to do with you couldn't afford certain colors, right?
Right. And so then as like a merchant class or some class figured out a way to make money, they would start wearing fur, or they would start getting purple clothes or blue or something. And then yes, you had what were functionally sumptuary laws, like you're not allowed to spend so much money on how you look. And so this color, or this, like how wide the ribbon on your skirt is, or how much fur you're wearing, we're going to make a law about that and say only the people in this class can do this, the people in the class above them can do that plus this, so on and so forth. So it was really the upper classes, like you were saying, don't change. I like how things are. So I'm going to make laws that say your clothes can't be as nice or nicer than my clothes.
And that's really what happened in China. They were like, we're on top of the world. We're just going to freeze this shit in place. Nobody's going to stop us. And they did. It worked out for 400 years, but then the wheels fell off.
As it does. So, So
as they will in 400 years. Things change.
So let's do our quick rundown, our Power Ranger lineup, so we can keep track of who's who.
Alrighty, hit us.
Because we've got the blue Power Ranger, who's Ishido, and he's kind of the castle caretaker. And then we've got Toronaga, and he's always going to be wearing browns. Then you've got Sugiyama. He's kind of like the old wise guy, and he'll always be in blue, green, and he'll always have his badge is a lotus flower.
I love the way, so I've always loved the way Japanese men in particular speak, because it's so, they got and that old guy is like this the whole time, and it's just amazing to hear him talk. I love it because he just sounds like he's too disgusted with everybody to even bother stabbing you. He's just like, I gotta just tell you all this shit.
Yeah,
he's too old for this shit. Like, that is his tone of voice.
Yes. And then there's Ohno, leprosy guy. He'll always have the gray drape on. Okay, 90% of the time he'll have the gray drape on.
Ooh, I looked up photos of severe leprosy to see if it was accurate, and I wish I had not looked up. Don't look up photos of leprosy, people. And when I say don't, I mean do not. It will not benefit you in any way, and it will only make your life worse having done so.
There you go. Imagine
a burn victim who's lost all their fingers, and somehow they're smiling with a bunch of teeth falling out of their face, and their nose is off. And then that's leprosy.
Yeah, the one advantage you have is that the nerves are dead. But yeah, so
yeah, but you still look like a burn victim, which is wow. Oof.
Yeah, but his badge is this 4-lobed flower. So leprosy guy, Ohno. I mean, that's great. Oh no, he's got leprosy.
Oh no, I look like Anakin Skywalker after I'm getting melted in the lava.
And then the last guy, who is going to be more important apparently, is Kiyama. He's always in red, and he's in tight with the Jesuits. Like, these are like, some of these guys are like Christian, but Kiyama is the one who's in tight. He's always in red, and he is the one who's in with the Jesuits, because the Jesuits are funding him. Like, he's getting super duper rich. So he's like, yeah, I like Christianity. Look at all this money it's getting me.
And he gets called out for it as well.
Yeah, and his badge is a shell. Toronaga's badge is like the 3 spheres, and Ishido is sort of this like Greek key square knot looking badge. And so we've got colors for all of them. They each have their own badge that is associated with them. So hopefully we can kind of keep them straight.
Just doing everything better than they were doing in Europe at the time. Just everything.
So once we sort of see all these guys, just the whole rigmarole of how you sign an important document. How is that?
Oh, yeah. It was quite a production. It was not...
But it wasn't just like there was already a desk and he just sat down at the desk. No! Like, they put down the special document signing cushion, and then they bring out the special document signing table from the magical closet somewhere that we don't know. And, and there's the tray with, like, the special box with the document in it, and the special tray for you to, like clean off your stamp, and, like, just...
Oh, fluffs out both his sleeves before he goes and flaps them out to the side, and then he takes his sweet time, like, reading the document. Yeah.
900 steps before he actually got to the point of stamping that document.
And how different is this than every depiction of, especially now in America? Yeah. It's just like a person buried in papers, just like signing shit they're not reading and angrily handing it off to some person who's like harried as hell and running off to a different direction.
There's like six servants involved with just getting him this single document. Like nothing. You can't do anything simply. Everything has a ceremony.
Yeah. But again, it's that mindfulness where they're actually paying attention to what they're doing. To every single thing that they do, they give it their utmost attention.
Yes.
I love all the politeness in this. It makes me, it's very pleasing.
Yes. And after that, we get to see Kiyama, and like they learn that John Blackthorne, the Anjin, the pilot, he's a freaking pirate. And just one of the best lines. We must politely demand that this man be executed. It's so polite. And then we get to see the captain, again, as a contrast of the Jesuits' black ship, the one that's going between China and Japan, bringing Chinese silk to Japan and then like making the profit off of it and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, swear, goddamn slur. Yeah, just, politeness. Who needs that? I'm a captain of a ship.
Well, not only that, from Macau. And I mean, to people who live in the now, you're not aware of what Macau was. But Macau didn't used to be like this Asian Las Vegas. It was like, it was like an entire city of New Jack City. They had one city block called Kowloon City Kowloon City was one gigantic building, like Mega City 1, that was buildings that had been filled in between the buildings, like in the streets and alleys, with extra buildings. And it was fucking crazy. And like Macau is even wilder than that. Like it was the wild west.
Yeah, I mean, basically how Macau started is the Portuguese showed up in the Hong Kong harbor, whatever it was called then, and are like, hey, we're here to do business. And the Chinese are like, whoa, you stinky people, go stay on that island over there. Like, yeah.
Yeah, on that island nobody fucking wants. Go to that one.
Right, yeah.
And go be filthy over there.
Yes, that was exactly it. And so they sort of built a fortress there, and that's where the Portuguese sort of controlled trade in and out of China for a really long time. And
how they ran their attempt to proselytize Japan and China into submission.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when they first got there, the name that was getting back was Kitai, so that's where the word Cathay comes from.
So Kitai is the name of the Karakitai Empire, which was in Xinjiang. And it was the most powerful empire in Asia. It was more powerful than the Chinese, and at the time, right before Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan was encouraged by his Christian wife to murder the Karakitai because although they were the most advanced empire in the world, they had also adopted Islam. And so it was not the insult that I thought it was that drove him to kill all the Karakitai. It was his Christian wife who kept goading him into killing Muslims.
Oh, okay. And I thought it was also...
And so the Karakitai is where you get Cathay from. I actually did a long-ass post about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think... Genghis Khan also just generally had a lot of animosity towards cities in general.
Yeah. So they got that name from Marco Polo, from the Adventures of Marco Polo. That's where they got the name Cathay.
Yeah.
And it was because he visited the Karakitai before he visited the Mongols.
The Mongols. Okay, because he visited Kublai Khan.
Well, he stopped in whatever the main town, Karakorum or whatever it was that was the head of the Karakitai, and it was a beautiful city still.
Yeah, when the Portuguese were going to the east, they were looking for Cathay. They didn't sort of have this concept of China yet. And they found out about Japan, the Japans, because I think that's really interesting, calling them the Japans, like the Philippines. Acknowledging that Japan is a bunch of islands, yeah.
Well, it's multiple islands.
Yes.
I think that's probably why they called it the Japans. Yes. It was the Japanese islands.
And so that was a cool twist as well. And so on one hand, we got to see Alvedo Tsuji-san, the translator, sort of trying to chill out John Blackthorne, like, hey, yo, these people are subtle. You gotta, like, dial it down. Cool it. But then we get to see him using, like, his attempts at subtlety on Mariko. And there's like, watching the two of them, the translator lady and the translator dude, trying to get information out of each other was kind of fun.
Yeah, there's so much subtext and so many different battles going on so many different fronts. And John Blackthorne, his character, or any man in his 20s or 30s would not, especially if they hadn't been raised in an environment where they needed to be aware of these things, would have been completely oblivious to them. He's living in his own world where he's like, I'm just going to force my way through this goddamn thing like I've done everything else in my life.
Yes. And again, just sort of looking at this house and garden and everything that Mariko lives in. And one of the Japanese sort of signs of, like, I am so rich and clean and have so many servants was the fact that the women had that over kimono, uchikake, that they, like, could drag on the floor as they walked through their homes. Like, that was a flex.
I've really, in the last 24 hours, have really come to the understanding of what the ladies in waiting were. Like, it was all about flexing. Like, those women were there to pose with you, and it was like they probably had plays and moved in formations and shit. Yeah. So it was all about, like, making an entrance, and then I'm trying to describe it to guys so they would understand. Like, it's like having two bodyguards flanking you on either side.
It's your posse.
To give the impression that you're, like, a scary but cool badass. That's what these ladies in waiting were about.
Right, and it was giving the women clout. I mean, it's just like now, there are certain musical artists and whatever who, like, never show up to a gig alone or to an interview alone. They always have, like, their posse with them, just showing up with them. Like, I'm not alone. I have this group of people who's always around me and, watching out for me and fetching and carrying for me.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, that's all it is. And it has always been exactly that, I am such an important person. I can't travel alone. I need this protection. I need this catering to my needs because I'm so busy and I'm doing all these other important things, man.
Well, plus it helps you get noticed when, especially for a woman at this time, if you wanted your voice to be heard, you not only did you speak up in a specific tone of voice, but you had these ladies in waiting flanking you to emphasize what you were saying, not doing a yeah man kind of thing, but they were literally posing in such a way to accentuate, like, the attention on you. And at least in the other film I was watching, the ladies in waiting would dress in a certain way to accentuate what the woman that they were attending would wear.
Right, because I mean, this is sort of like a different twist. Like, there's no question that Japan wasn't a patriarchy, but how it worked versus how the European patriarchy worked was a little different. So in both cases, women are always, always, always subservient to men. But in Japan, your rank gave you power over men who had less status than you in a way it tended not to in Europe.
Well, especially for widows. A widowed woman kept her husband's samurai title, whereas a woman in Europe was just, a broken, used woman who was then shut off in a nunnery or whatever.
Right, and so sort of like in the first episode where that woman's husband and baby have to be executed for reasons, like, she is not necessarily sent to a nunnery because she's no longer a virgin. Like, no, as a person, she still has value to the society. Whereas, except in very rare cases, the fact that you were no longer a virgin in hereditary monarchies could really make it difficult for you to retain your title and power and value.
Just the most exceedingly stupid thing in the world, but no one has ever accused humans of being smart.
Nope.
We're just persistent.
And so that Yeah, and so that was kind of interesting. Just like, I wouldn't want to go back to either one, but sort of the different ways things had been done in each case.
Oh, yeah, it was all shit, but I would have taken Japan over, Japan or China over Europe every single day of the week and twice on Sunday.
I mean, the fact that they're like clean floors, we value those.
I mean, shit, there were probably still places in the Incan Empire that were still decent and had running water. And,
oh, yeah.
You know, it
running
was still
water,
not a nightmare yet because the Spanish hadn't touched
Maybe
it.
we shouldn't just shit in the streets.
Yeah.
So there was another kind of like cultural moment that just cracked me up in this. So
which one? It couldn't have been better than the what? 2 baths in a week?
Yeah. So we get to see John Blackthorne taken out of the prison, and he's being taken somewhere to he doesn't know what's going on. And he sees, like, they set him up for his execution or something, and they put a paper blindfold on him. Like, paper was hard to get and like reused 90 million times in Europe at this point, because it's all made out of cotton, basically. There is no wood pulp paper. You have parchment, which is animal skins, and you have beaten cotton rag paper. And so the fact that they put a disposable paper blindfold on him.
So this is rice paper then?
Yeah.
So we had rice in Europe at this time because the Italians and the Spanish had started cultivating it.
Right, because the Arabs had brought it to Spain.
So how in the hell did we not have rice paper?
Because, first of all, Japan as an island nation, had limited supplies, and so they were always figuring out ways to do more with less.
But China had rice paper. We couldn't have got it.
China had rice paper. It also had China had hemp paper. It had mulberry. Like they had actually figured out plant fiber papers long before Europe did.
It just seems like there's any number of ways that. I say this all day long about everything. There's just any number of ways things could have been better, and they just.
But
weren't.
I just sort of like, as weird as everything was happening to John Blackthorne, like they give him a disposable paper blindfold, and I'm just like, he's like, what? Hi, wait.
Oh yeah, instead of a filthy like bag or whatever they would have put over his head, people had thrown up in, and like dead rats had been in it that day, and like
yes, and in the 17th century, 1600, it's all this rag, this like pounded cotton rag paper and parchment. Like that's all he has access to, and they're like, yeah, you're just a disposable paper blindfold. Blurp, blurp. But the rescue, like I loved seeing the arrows and the armor and the different outfits that all of like the bandits and the warriors and everybody had. And then Yabashuge, who's like Toronaga's underling. He was the weirdo in the first episode who was like into boiling the guy, and yeah. He's like, look, I may be a little fish here in Osaka. Like I am an underling to so many people, but I'm gonna kick this John Blackthorne guy. I'm gonna kick this Anjin-san a few more times because I got power over him.
When you were saying about how expensive it must have appeared to John Blackthorne, this paper mask over his head. It occurred to me, so in China at this time, they were using paper armor instead of plate armor because it was a third of the price. So basically Chinese armor and Japanese armor were very similar. They wore different helmets and stuff, but I mean, they looked more or less, they were constructed more or less the same way. And so they would use folded paper instead of
metal,
instead of the leather and the iron armor. Yeah, and it was a third the price. It was a third as heavy, and it was like a very democratizing way to, fight at this point. I mean, it degraded quickly, but still, like, you could replace it and move on with your life. It was very simple.
Well, and also, I mean, the Chinese had that conscript army, and everybody just kept, like, they'd raise an army out of the peasantry and just throw it at a problem, and it would fail or it would succeed. I don't know. I don't care. And so it wasn't like you were outfitting necessarily an army you were keeping around for a long time. either.
Yeah, well, that is true. So the fact that when it got wet, it didn't really work well. Didn't really matter so much. Like, oh, they got hacked up that time.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it worked just as well as leather and iron armor. Like in some cases, it worked better. In some cases, it worked worse. But MythBusters actually did an episode about it. And it was very fun.
Oh yeah, the physics of folding paper and kind of what it does is really cool. But it also shows like how advanced their paper making was at this point, that if they were mass producing it for something like that.
Yeah, and also it also shows how, kind of when you're playing Civilization or a game like that, and you have to put your resources into researching one thing like paper over another thing like armor, you don't really have a good way to conceptualize it. But then when you see this show, you're like, oh my God, that's why a guy is marveling over a cannonball, and then the guy with all the cannonballs is marveling at, holy shit, look at all the paper that guy has.
Right.
He must be the richest man on earth.
Right. It is interesting, when you look at all the lacquered dishes, that was another thing. Like, you would have some ceramics, but again, ceramics are a very wood heavy material. You have to chop down a lot of trees, make a lot of charcoal, and burn it for a long time to get ceramics. And so it's going to be much cheaper to just have wooden vessels that you lacquer, because those will be waterproof. At least, like, you can't throw them through the dishwasher, but they didn't have dishwashers. They just hand washed everything.
You can also spread disease through pottery making, which I just discovered in the news this week. But wood is inherently antibacterial. So,
yes, it
like
is.
your wooden cutting board is disinfecting itself. You still should clean it, but
yes, but yeah, you don't necessarily need a plastic one to be safe. So the rescue of John Blackthorne is, to me, where things got like super exciting for like putting this show in historical context and putting the world in context, and just like, this is what the world looked like to the Europeans, this is what the world looked like to the Japanese, because Blackthorne gets rescued by the weird Yabashuge guy. He gets taken to Toronaga, even though Ishido is the one who sort of contracted him to go get John Blackthorne. So as you've got like things going back and forth, but it's like, explain to me the world. And so John Blackthorne starts drawing in the sand, like, here's what's going on. This is what the world looks like. And he makes me so happy because he sort of sketches out the continents and does not include Australia, which was accurate because Europeans hadn't found Australia yet. They didn't know about it. And he mentions the Treaty of Tordesillas.
okay.
And the Treaty of Tordesillas was issued by one of the Pope Gregories in the 15th century because the Portuguese and the Spanish were fighting with each other and spending so much money on fighting each other that the Pope wasn't getting any money from them, which he should have been, goddammit. And so he's like, stop fighting. You guys are like fighting over who gets what when I go and do colonization. It's like, shut up. You get this half and you get that half. And shut it. And because of where the line was drawn, they didn't realize like how far out into the Atlantic Ocean South America came at that point. And so where the halfway line was marked, it cut through South America, which is why Brazil is Portuguese and the rest of South America is Spanish.
Ah, okay. The difference between the Portuguese and the Spanish has always confused me, especially because they were both Carthaginian settlements instead of Roman. So, like, you would think that they would be kind of united in that, like... But I guess was it the difference in, like, the Ottoman rule? Is that kind of where the two of them split?
There's a lot of differences. So yes, the Carthaginians were in the area, but the Romans came in, and Spain was kind of like the new world for the Romans, and there was like gold and silver and a lot of agricultural land that the Romans...
Spain is basically like the Texas of Europe.
Right, exactly. And so the Romans came in, and so the Spanish absorbed a lot of Roman culture, whereas the Portuguese, they have that mountain range, and so they didn't get the Roman culture. But also they were less invaded by the Carthaginians, same reason. They had that mountain range there. And so,
Oh, and I guess the Visigoths also didn't get in so much because, again, the mountain range.
So the people who have been living in Portugal, have been less invaded by the outside world than Spain was. Like when the Muslims came up across the Strait of Gibraltar from North Africa, they never got to Portugal.
Okay, interesting. I had no idea. I thought, so Portugal is like the Basques then, and just because they lived in the mountains, they were just kind of resistant to any kind of cultural exchange or takeover.
I mean, the Basques will come for you for saying that, but but yes, there are a lot of continuities between Basque culture and Portuguese culture that you'll sort of see these things that, like, hey, we didn't pick up, like, this tendency or this cultural thing was not replaced by outside sources because, they're sort of like guarded from that.
Yeah, they have a completely unintelligible language and refuse to season their food, both of which are strange as hell. But
Yeah. Even today, like traditional.
Come and get me, Basques.
Yeah.
Your food sucks.
I don't know. There's a lot of interesting Basque food, but I mean, and this is part of the reason why the Portuguese started their whole seafaring venture, is they were sort of guarded from the rest of Europe and sort of expanding into the land, and so they expanded into the ocean.
Well, that was their tradition, being Carthaginian. I mean, that's exactly what the Carthaginians did. They just founded these different, like, coastal cities, and they used the ocean as their highway, as opposed to founding a bunch of cities on land and creating highways.
Right. And so sometimes you'll hear about the sea roads. And so, there are definitely cultures that are like, travel over land is for chumps. We're going to do it all by water.
Oh, that was another thing I did notice in this show, is that that they just their attention to detail. The ground outside of the Portuguese where they're staying is mud, but everywhere else you have gravel roads going everywhere, unless they're in the woods or something.
Right, and so even the village where they haven't graveled everything, it's just dirt, but like it's not muddy the same way it is around the Portuguese port. Yeah.
Yeah, where there's like mud spattered up on the walls and everything. Nobody's cleaned anything. It's just gross.
They are great. And it's when Blackthorn is talking about the Treaty of Tordesillas and like, yes, the Portuguese, you're on the Portuguese side, and they're here to take over your country. Yep, they are. And it was literally like, dun, dun, dun.
When he was like, so the Portuguese think they own Japan. And he just looked up and he was like, oh, the hell you say? These filthy motherfuckers over here?
Yeah. Oh, really? And this is also like a nice moment to notice. Like it happens several other times, but that the Japanese totally have man-spreading as well.
Oh, do they? I didn't. Oh, well, wait, are you talking about the weird way that they walk and run? Because I didn't know that the Japanese men did the geisha, like, walk thing, but watching them, like, hold their pants and kind of skitter around, it's such a strange way to move.
Those hakama pants are, like, long and baggy and everything, but it's just the way men's dress is. Like, you'll notice, like, the big, important guys sit cross-legged, and everybody who's less important than them kneels. And so if you're a big important dude, you sit on your butt and you sit with like your knees out. You sit cross-legged.
Ah.
And so women are never going to be as important, but also the way their kimonos are made, you can't sit cross-legged in those things. Women always kneel like tidy and together. Yeah. So how you sit is even a power move in Japan.
These are all things that John that he could not have picked up on.
Oh God, no! But fortunately, for a lot of the time, like I don't think that man can sit cross-legged. I was impressed at how good he got it.
Do you keep forgetting that that's not Tom Hardy? Because I'm certain it's Tom Hardy through the whole thing, and then I'm like, holy shit, that's really not Tom Hardy, but it really seems like it is.
He's not a familiar face to me, so I'm just like, some guy. Like, when it comes to actors, I can be a little bit face blind unless I really know the person. And it takes me a while to, like, really, like, get somebody's face imprinted in my mind. And so, Yeah, when meeting new people, unless there was something about them that really like hooked in my mind. I was bad at faces, man.
Oh, I'm horrific at it, but I'm trying to get better.
Yes, which is why I really appreciate these guys being color coded. But I just sort of love how this all comes full circle. Like they find out, like the Portuguese are trying to take over, and so Toronaga, who's like the foreign relations guy, also is, hey, Tsuji-san, translator dude, Jesuit. Psh, nope, you cannot leave Japan with your big money ship. Neener, neener, neener. So even though the Jesuits are way more settled than this Englishman, they have nothing on the Japanese for subtlety. It was great.
It's fun. I didn't realize that there was the same kind of like harbor control that you have at like for air traffic control now. I didn't realize that you had to get permission to leave and to come into port and all that.
Well, if you sort of think about it, I mean, Japan is such a military organized state at this point. I mean, can you seriously imagine anything as major as your one foreign port, like not controlling the entrances and the exits of the trading ship?
No, I guess it makes sense now, but it's, we have this conception we're so much more advanced than all the previous generations. You know what I mean? And at least in the West, we were not on the ball for the longest time. So it's nice to see somebody was on the ball, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, we definitely have that moment where Mariko's just like, hey, you want to take a bath? Because, you have just been tossed around. You've been through it, man. And he's like, nah, I'm good. She's like, are you sure? He's like, nah, I already had, 2 baths since I got to Japan? Isn't that enough?
That was my favorite quote in the entire thing. I loved it so much. What? 2 baths in a week? What do you want me to get, the flux?
Yeah, I could die from all this bath. Whoa.
What is the flux?
Oh, it's just an archaic word for flu.
Oh, okay.
It's another word like ague, or it's just another word for like having your body's humors are out of balance, and so you feel crappy.
Yes, because this was still the era of the humors.
Right, because remember when he's getting his arm looked at, or no, that's next episode. Never mind.
That is the next episode.
Okay, I will take that out.
So we can jump ahead.
Yeah.
At some point, he is getting medical attention, and he's like, no, you have to bleed out the bad blood.
Yeah,
She's like,
yeah, what are you doing?
I have never heard of that procedure, but this man is an actual doctor, so shut up.
About? In fact, why don't we go ahead and get to how John Blackthorne gets a cut on his arm? The most efficient murdering maid you have ever seen to finish off this episode.
Yes. So this is just a little bit of fun trivia because I thought it might be fun for us going forward to try to play Spot the Ninja, because I didn't really know much about ninjas before, because if you've ever met a person who's into ninjutsu, they will put you off of ninjas for the rest of your life. You'll just come to the conclusion they don't know what the fuck, like, the ninjas are just a joke. They never actually happened. I lived under that.
So ninjutsu is like the CrossFit of Japanese martial arts?
CrossFit's actually effective. Ninjutsu is not. So
I'm just saying a certain type of CrossFit.
Yes. Oh, yeah. The one who will tell you that you can cure cancer with CrossFit.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't need both kidneys? No.
Exactly. The guy who's on the carnivore diet. Yeah. But so the ninja had 7 ways of living.
Okay.
So they always lived a gimmick. They always had some different role they would play in society, and those 7 different roles were an actor/entertainer.
Okay.
A ronin, a masterless samurai, a Buddhist monk, a wandering priest, a mountain warrior monk, a merchant, or a musician.
So they don't include servant.
They did not include servant in that list. So this was a curious choice for an assassin in this, because this was apparently a very, I guess they probably did servant too, but the 7 main ones were those. And so these ninjas were not like we think about well, at least in the West, we think about them as like just jumping over a wall and killing everybody with shuriken, and then, you know, fighting a samurai and killing them. But these people avoided. It was more like Metal Gear Solid, where you were just endlessly creeping around or like hanging onto a rafter for 5 hours until people stopped playing cards so you could jump down and stab a guy in the neck. Like, it was really, really about like hiding and blending in and being a master of disguise. They had their Dana Carvey turned up all the way. So they for anybody who hasn't seen Master of Disguise, it is a phenomenal 90s comedy. So so they would try to infiltrate different places and then kill the person that they wanted to kill, just like the Medicis had their own assassins and the Borgias and all them in Italy at this time.
And even though they didn't mention servants in that list, those are all people who can show up in places, because the world is a small town in Japan, and if like a stranger shows up, there's immediate suspicion. But all 7 of those things that you mentioned are people who can show up as a new guy in town, and everybody's like, oh yeah, this type of person is always a new guy in town. An actor will show up in your town. Like, that doesn't cause suspicion. The wandering monk shows up in your town. That doesn't cause suspicion. You know, the wild forest priest, like, shows up in town occasionally.
And I think it's fun that so these people are all in the same non-class in society, but they're all like of the same ilk. So like a Ronin, which is like basically a monstrous piece of shit in Japan at the time. Like that's where an actor is. If you're an actor or a monk, like they just think of you as you're just shit. You're not even human.
Yeah, you're not human. Yeah, and so a lot of the consideration, you know, that you have to worry about and think about with sort of people, and the Victorians were very good at doing this. Like, either you were a gentleman or you were a lady, or you were a person. And so they'd be like, could you please ask that person to go to the servants' entrance?
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard the word person used as a pejorative, but it's all in the manner in which you say it. It's not the word itself.
Right. And just being of the people was such an insult. Like, if you were rich enough and you had like a noble heritage, you were somebody. Like, I can identify sort of like where you fit in the giant puzzle of like who's who, but if I can't connect you to anyone, it's like, oh, you're just a person. You're not somebody. And so all of these individuals that you're naming, all these different jobs, like, those are not anybody. Like, you can't connect them to their heritage. You can't connect them to, you know, somebody famous. You can't connect them to a noble family. They're nobody. Like a Buddhist priest would...
Or even if you could, I mean, Nell Gwyn was like 50 years before this at this time, but like she was the most famous actress in England at the time. I mean, John Blackthorne would have known of this woman, but she was also the most famous prostitute of the time. So that they would have had... This is the only direct, like, a straight line from east to west. Like, the same exact thing was happening in Europe at the time, where like if you were one of those condottieri or whatever they were called, the mercenaries,
condottieri,
that were going all over Europe at the time.
Yes,
condottieri. Yeah. So they, it's the same thing. Ronin, condottieri, the traveling priests. The whole thing is that is the only the external social structure.
Right, right, and some of those like outside the bounds of normal society are more and less respectable. Like if you show up in town and you're a Buddhist priest, because most of the Japanese were some flavor of Buddhist, or at least had respect for Buddhism, like they would give you a place to sleep and a meal and everything. They might not necessarily like let you come into the clean parts of the houses, but you know, they might let you use the bathhouse, who knows, or the community bathhouse. Like you could sort of move through society as a Buddhist priest and be treated pretty well, as opposed to being a Ronin. They're like, yeah, please don't come into our village. No.
yeah. Or a Shinto priest, they would have had the same respect for.
Right.
And but a merchant or a musician, and I guess they would have had to go to their own community to get lodging, like wherever the merchants were. And they had the same thing in Europe. Like that's why we talked about last time about the free cities.
The guilds.
Guilds in the free cities of the Hanseatic League.
Yeah, and so if you were a guildsman, you would have your papers with you, and so you'd show up and you're like, I'm in such and such a guild, and then like go over there, and literally if you were a journeyman of some trade, you were literally had to be traveling around. Like that was like after you were an apprentice, you got a certain amount of skill in, leather working or metal working or goldsmithing or beer making, I don't know, anything. You had your apprenticeship period, and then you were sent out to be a journeyman. So you traveled around from a bunch of different masters, sort of gathering more skills, but also spending time offering your labor in exchange for those new skills.
Ah, just like a martial arts master would have at that time. So they're going from place to place, learning these different things, sweeping up around the gym. Interesting.
And so that's where the word masterpiece comes from, to graduate from being a journeyman to a master of whatever trade you were in, master boat builder. You would have to create your masterpiece.
Like a senior thesis.
Bingo. Yeah, capstone project.
Ah, that's so cool.
Yeah. So that's where all of like these terms that we've sort of swallowed whole into the English language come from. But yeah, there was that whole hierarchy of skill that you'd have to go through. And, the Japanese workshop system totally had the same thing. Yeah. And so you'd show up and you were like a merchant or a traveling skilled worker who, I don't know, who did like shoji blinds or curtains or, corner pieces or front gates or whatever.
Huh. Well, that's fascinating. Because they are so far apart in ways, it's amazing to see how they can be exactly the same at the same time.
But yes, so we get back to the maid who is killer. Oh, that was the next question I was going to ask you. So in your research about ninjas, a female ninja, historically accurate?
I didn't see any distinctions for gender on ninja. It was a family affair between. There were two different like clans of ninjas,
okay.
but each family produced their own ninjas. So much of what we know about ninjas is very much like mythological and legendary, because nobody ever saw a ninja climb a wall. Nobody ever saw a ninja kill anybody, because the whole point was you couldn't see him do shit.
Arrow midair.
Yeah, and they didn't write anything down because they didn't want people to know their secrets. So the way I have a picture in my head is a lot like Assassin's Creed. Like it was a lot of wild parkour shit and then hiding in a dark corner until you had the opportunity to stab somebody in the neck.
Because my assumption would be that there would definitely be female ninjas, because women were trained in weapons in Japan, or noble women were trained in weapons in Japan.
Well, also, the point of having these 7 different ways of living is that nobody looks at these people. They are not people,
right.
So nobody gives a shit about them. And women are, even the highest ranking woman is always a step down from the highest ranking man, so you're immediately going to be shadowed. Like you already have that little haze over your face that people aren't looking at you.
Right, sort of blur out. But yeah, she is a great assassin. She just goes in there and she's taking people out left and right. One fun thing about her like moving through this house, there are no halls in most Japanese houses. All the rooms are just rooms touching other rooms.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't noticed that. But yeah, you're right. That was a great scene, the way she went from room to room and the way they shot it.
Yeah. So if you're like in the palace, there's going to be hallways. But this was actually a commonality between Europe and Japan, is most places did not have hallways between rooms. You just had a room and then a door into another room. Halls are coming after this period. So that was just like a little tidbit. But
all right. Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
It felt very Kill Bill 2, didn't it? Yeah.
Toronaga, for whatever reason, had said, hey, Blackthorn, you sleep in my room and I'll sleep in like your little guest quarter. But, he's a paranoid warlord. You don't sleep in the same room every night. And with the portable beds the Japanese have, why not?
Yeah. Well, it turned out to be a good move, because the assassin well, I guess it wasn't necessarily a good move, because the assassin wasn't trying to kill him. The assassin was trying to kill John Blackthorn.
Right. And Toronaga like sticks that away in his belt and his obi, and he's like, okay, what does this mean? Which that's sort of where it leaves us at the end of this episode. Like, somebody is trying to kill Blackthorn. Like, Toronaga did the the diplomatic thing, like, yeah, sure, fine, he's not that important to me, Ishido, I'll send him to prison where he's gonna get killed, and then he ends up getting rescued. But it's like, oh, okay, there are people who do not want this dude spilling what he knows.
Yeah, I felt like the idea to move him to the prison was just a ploy to have him get sprung by that guy, and then the Christians showed up like it kind of as a. That seems to happen a lot in this show, where it's how real life happens, where it's like, you're not the only one who has a plot in the world. You're not the only one who has a plan for the day.
Right. And yeah, Blackthorn is just going to get bapped around left, right, and center by everybody has a plot in the show. Ishido, the blue guy, has something going on. Toronaga has his own thing going on. Kiyama definitely has his thing going on because he's getting money from the Portuguese, and Toronaga just said, no, Portuguese can't go get more money to give you. So there is a lot going on here.
Yeah. Everybody's fighting everybody. But that really is the world at this time. Everybody was fighting everyone.
So before we get out of here, I just want to spend a little time talking about everybody's hair, because they did such a cool job with the hair. So John Blackthorn, he's a filthy European, so they just got to cut off all his lice-ridden, nasty locks. So that's fine. Because when we started this, I mean, all those guys were just stringy and disgusting and oily coming off that boat. So,
yeah, they looked
that
gross.
was cool. So then you notice the maids and the little kid just have like simple ponytails. They just tie their hair back. Some of them have bangs, some of them don't. The heir has bangs because he's the heir, and they spend a lot more time on his hair. But their ponytails are nothing special. Then you have the samurai ponytails, and they have the top of their head shaven. So they have that big bald patch on the top of their heads.
Yeah, in the West they called it a tonsure.
Yes.
That's the haircut that monks would get, except they grew it out in the back. It was party in the back for the samurai.
For the samurai, whereas you see the translator guy, he's just got ring around the head, which always looks so funny to me. But yeah, and that's.
I think the idea is to make dudes look wise by I think the purported idea was to make dudes look wise, but really it was old guys embarrassed about their hair, and they were like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna make these young guys cut their hair off and look like me."
And I don't know if this was true in Japan, but in China there was a similar like tonsure type haircut for people in the military, and part of that was to be like when you showed up in a bar or whatever, and you said I'm in the military, they're like, "Okay, yeah, how do you know?" And they're like, "See, you're." But it was also a anti-desertion method.
Ah, it wasn't just about looking like wise old man. It was also about you can't desert.
Right, because you had this haircut, with this bald top. And so I don't know if that was true in Japan, but in China, for some periods, they would create this particular haircut for conscripts in the military so they couldn't desert as easily.
Huh. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty cool that they had such a clever idea, but I guess you had to because they were patrolling like the Silk Road and stuff like that. So you needed a way to make sure these guys couldn't just go native.
Right, but it was also a way to create recognition because you didn't have uniforms per se at this point.
Yep.
Because either you had no armor or you were just provided with whatever the next guy up in the system who sent you off to war dressed you in. So you had to have like sort of an identifying way, which is incidentally those badges I was talking about, the lotus flower, the four-lobed flower, the shell, the three spheres, like that would be the badge that they would slap on you so you would know like which team you were on.
Ah.
So as you went up in rank in samurai, that need to have that tonsure went away.
Okay.
So in the first episode, you'll notice like the headman of the village, he has the tonsure, but the guy just one above him, Yabashuge, he has a full head of hair that he just pulls back into a ponytail.
Man, that had to be annoying as hell for the guys who lost their hair before they got the opportunity to grow it out. That really had to be like a real shitty thing.
Sorry. And then, but he has just kind of like a plain old ponytail top knot thingamy. And then when you get even higher in rank, they've got that funny like stick 'em up in the back thing going on.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That like Birds of Paradise thing.
Right. And that's another thing where it's like you're a rich guy, you have like a special servant to do your hair in that wacky hairstyle, and you also have like very special cords to like wrap your hair that way. Like what cord you're using to wrap your hair is part of your outfit.
Oh wow, that's pretty wild. It just for me, it's like these guys would, or their servants would have killed for TikTok back in the day. Like, so they could have gotten new hairstyle tips and tricks, and like, here's 18,000 new hairstyles you could do with chopsticks. Like, woohoo!
Nah, there's no changing. So that's kind of like the dude hairstyle thing in the hierarchy of hair. With the women, if you're a maid, you just have like the ponytail in the back. If you are a rich, hot young thing, you have the most complicated hair that doesn't allow you to like do shit in. And you have the long hair, and it's not just hanging down your back. You like tie it midway sort of down your back with that ribbon. And then in the front, you pull some of the hair forward. You have like these two separate strips. But then you also have like the long bangs. And if you look at this hairstyle, you can barely turn your head fast in this hairstyle. Like that's how still and calm and pristine you have to be. Like you're not doing anything exciting in that hairstyle.
Well, they had the same kind of thing going on in Europe, though. They were wearing high heels. They had those huge horsehair headdresses that they wore where you had to...
Oh, the pennants, yeah.
Yeah, maintain a perfectly upright position or else you'd break your neck and fall over. So...
Yeah. But it is sort of interesting. Like, the maids just have, like, a regular old ponytail because, like, they've got to, clean floors.
Move their head around.
Serve food, murder people.
Yeah. Yeah, they got a lot on their plate. Take care of babies.
Right. Whereas the women who like have the long dresses that can like skim over the perfectly clean floors that the maids have cleaned also have this hairstyle that basically doesn't allow them to move very much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was a real big thing I guess with noble women in China, they broke their feet to keep them from moving around. But I guess they had to have their own way to keep Japanese people from doing that, even though they were like, let's not break our kids' feet like these savages over here.
Let's just put them in these very tight kimonos so they can't take very big steps and put them in these hairstyles that they can't disarrange and make it so that if you just even turn your head too fast, you've disarranged your hair.
Yep. Same thing in Europe. It's same exact thing. Let's put a corset on her. She can still breathe too much. Tighten it up.
Yep. And yeah, creating these women's fashions and the richer women taking them to extremes. Like I can prove I am rich because I am wearing something that I literally cannot do any effort in. I will be wearing a 40-pound dress that I can barely breathe in. And that's how you know I'm rich, because there's no way I can do a damn thing for myself in this thing.
Yeah. I'm rich because I've inconvenienced myself more than any rational person ever would.
Right.
At great expense, at very great expense. It's the very opposite of the modern thing. Like, I want everything instantaneously, and I want it to cost everyone else everything.
Right. And that is one of the funny things about this show is that while the Portuguese interiors look very archaic, the Japanese interiors look very modern to our eyes because we are so enamored by this simplicity aesthetic.
Well, also, we actually live in clean homes now with, running water.
That
and
helps.
We bathe more than once a month or a year.
One hopes.
What was the average? So they were bathing in 1600 in Europe, a couple of times a year, maybe?
It was a class thing for sure. The lower down you were in class, the less often you bathed. And so there are plenty of people who bathed for Easter and Christmas to start off the new year. There are plenty of people. And when they got
New year, new me.
And when they got married, it was nice to sort of take a bath right before your wedding. It seems like a nice thing to do.
There you go. New year, new lice.
Right. But as you went up in class, the richer you were, people would take more baths. And especially when you got to noble women, one thing that they would do would be take baths, because these women weren't allowed to have jobs. It was all about one-upmanship. if you had hot and cold running servants who would like make you a bath once a week or twice a week or God knows how often, so you could be bathed and perfumed and everything. So the further up in class you went, the more often you bathed at this point. Sometimes. There were definitely people of different schools of thought who would be like, oh, bathing is dangerous, and they wouldn't bathe. But this is a really fun comparison, and I just can't help but compare some of the things that are called out as being foreign in Japan, and it's like the accessories are different, but it is still the same as what was going on in Europe in a lot of cases.
Yeah. They just they put their resources for research into slightly different things. So you end up with much more advanced paper products and much less advanced steel products. I love getting to see like the strategy games I've been playing for the last 20 years kind of in reality, so I understand like what was going on and how these different cultures got to meet each other and be like, oh my God, you have this cool stuff. I have this cool in my head, they would go, oh, you have this cool stuff. I have this cool stuff. Let's team up and make the best thing ever. But that's not.
No. Let's fight. So I can take your cool
I'm going to take your. Well, it was after the invention of the horse, though, because before that, it seemed like people would eventually come to the realization like this is not worth it. We're not going to walk 2 weeks to go kill people and then maybe not win. No, that's insane.
Nah. Let's get some horses along here. Only if you're rich, though. So, all right. Well, then we have coming up episode 3, and things start to get, we get some more insight into everybody's schemes. The Portuguese scheme, the red guy's scheme, like how many keep more money and keep Toronaga down and get my ship out. I don't really know what Leprosy guy's thoughts are. We do know that Ishido like hates Toronaga, blue guy. He's gonna try to get rid of him, and take over the whole council. So yeah, we'll have to see how all of these different threads work out.
And we get to see a comparison between the relative size of a Japanese ship at the time and a Portuguese man of war, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. Because the Japanese ship is still like sort of galley style. They have rowers down below, and then they just have the square rigged sail up top, the single sail. It's basically a Viking ship,
okay,
just bigger. Versus the Portuguese ship has like multi-mast, multi-sails, and I don't think they had rowers anymore at this point.
And it has the 2 castles, the foxhole and whatever the other one is called. Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't like that, when people say foxhole and you're like, what in the hell is that? It's a shortened forecastle. So what they did was they basically built a castle on the front and the back of the ship, which is why they got much taller in the like 15 and 1600s. And they would just fill them with archers and fire arrows at each other.
Yeah, it was sort of a continuation of the the Roman ships, and how the Romans sort of made their ships more and more these floating battle platforms.
Yeah. Well, it would discourage a boarding party if they were getting filled with arrows as they were trying to get onto the deck of the ship.
But yeah, this is going to be a complicated thing that we're going to have to unwind. But just sort of seeing the roots of what's going on in the 19th century based in, how these people are dealing with each other, how the world is being divided up. I love it. And the Japanese basically clearly invented Swiffer.
They had to have.
Yeah, that's just obvious to me. Well, in the meantime, where can people find you on the internet?
Come and see me on Instagram at Plague of Strength, where I post every day about stuff having to do with martial arts or weight training history, by and large. Every now and again I throw in some general history, but it's mostly lifting or martial arts related. How about you?
You can find me on my other podcast, The History of American Food. And at this point, I'm in season 4, and we have cookbooks at last. I mean, there've been cookbooks before, but now there's just like regular people cookbooks. And, American food starts to look like how we understand American food to be.
Oh, nice. Well, if anybody's ever tried to, or anybody wants to look up something that's incomprehensible, try looking up a recipe from the medieval times where they don't have any fucking... They're just like... they don't tell you any of the amounts of anything. It's just like, here's some stuff you could use. The end.
At that point, recipes were just notes people were taking to either remind themselves of something that they did or pass on the information to somebody who was already a cook. You never wrote anything down for like how to cook stuff. Like, yeah, you had to like go into a kitchen to learn that shit.
Yeah, well, and also they didn't have clocks or temperature gauges, so their methods of cooking were quite a bit different than ours.
Oh, yeah. It'd be like when the sun moves from here to here, you say this many Ave Marias or Our Fathers, or, you know, you can hold your hand next to the fire for so many breaths. Yeah, like that was how they were doing that.
Wow, that's crazy. We'll have to go into that some more because I love learning stuff like that. And also, so at this time in Japan and China, they would like street food you would see commonly, at least in film, is a rice ball that would be like wrapped in banana leaves. Is that just steamed rice?
Yeah, and though it might have, like, they probably cook it would depend. Either you cook the rice in a pot and then you'd like make up a thingy, kind of like a tamale, and then it would be wrapped in a banana leaf as a way to serve it, but also to keep it warm. Okay. But yeah, then there were also dishes that were actually cooked inside a banana leaf or some other kind of wrapping.
Oh, okay. Nice. Hey, banana leaves are something we might want to think about going back to get away from plastic.
Well, it would have been good if we hadn't sort of decimated the global banana sort of genetic variety.
Well,
I don't know. Okay. All right. Well, let's wrap this up and we'll see you for the next episode.
Yeah, it's so much for trying to double up on these episodes, huh?
No way. Too much.
It did not work out.
How long am I going to talk about hair? As long as I need to.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to hear about the hair in the next episode.
Well, but in this case, no, we're done with hair because we've covered all the important styles.
Okay, all right. Well, I won't necessarily hold you to that. You can go ahead. I'm sure somebody will show up bonnetless at some point.
All right, we will talk to you
later.
All
right, we'll catch you guys next week.
Bye.
We're on Instagram at PCG Podcast, and you can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.